Alright, so far we've learned how to take something like this, made in Photoshop, and something like this, made in Photoshop, and use them as displacement. Okay? So another thing that you need to know is how to generate displacement based upon change of mesh. So here's a small example of that. Here I have my high and here I have my low. I'm going to put my low on top of my high, and what I want to do is be able to transfer these maps. Okay, so if you go to lighting and shading and go to batch bake mental, well, wait a minute, transfer maps, you'll get this. I'm just going to clear all to this, remove everything, reset settings, and that way I have it defaulted at nothing. So my target mesh would be my lowest. My source mesh would be my highest. And I want to generate a displacement map. I like using TIFF, and it's used common settings in Maya. Down below are my common settings. For right now, I want to generate this based upon 512 by 512. I like to use world space, and if I was to use object space, I'd have to go modify freeze transformations and edit delete by type history and modify center pivot. Then I could use object space, but I like using world space for right now. Sample quality, I can go higher than this. I'm not using mental ray, but here's mental ray. And that's about it. So let's hit bake, see what happens, just by default. Well, we have this map, it got generated, it's this one right here, and we'll go to edit texture. As you can see, there's no representation of the actual cylinder that's present here. So you can see this is a cylinder, and why isn't it there? Well, that has to do with envelope. So we'll go to envelope, and we'll go search envelope, raise that up. And let's bake that. And let's look at that as a map. Let's click on it and go to edit texture. And there we go. So you can see now mechanically we're telling what the high and low is. Before we were setting the mid-tone gray within Photoshop. Here we're setting the mid-tone value based upon envelope. And then the gray is there, and then the two shades are there. Now, can we render this as far as the displacement is concerned? Well, sure. First off, let's get rid of the hot mess that is my workflow here, and keep that last one. And let's just clean up that. There we go. You'll see I have a ton of stuff. Anytime I'm generating displacements and playing around with generation of maps, I just got a ton of this information. I just want to really get rid of all of it. I just want my texture, and that's about it. Then I can go Lambert, make a new one, and rename it to Displace. Okay. Middle mouse button, click and drag this over to displacement map. And then again, let's go in here to my low, and middle mouse button, click and drag the material to it. So middle mouse button, click and drag, and I dragged it all the way to this. Okay, we generated that using Maya, but we're going to render it using mental ray. close that out. Remember, we also need an approximation editor. So under Window, Rendering Editors, Mental Ray Approximation Editor, we're going to create a new one, edit it, and we're going to assign it 4, just like before. Okay, let's render that out and see what it looks like. It's not too bad, right? I mean, like by default quality standards, I didn't set the mid-tone. I didn't have to worry about that, and it came out okay. And if I add another level of subdivision in there, I'm sure it will come out almost perfect. Not too bad. So that's the advantage of having it generated within Maya based upon the height and low, because that way you don't have to calculate as much for the displacement. So another thing that might help is insert an edge loop here, so when it does divide, it doesn't start concaving in. And the last thing you might want to think about is changing those numbers a little bit just to play around with it. Because at this point, it's gain. Okay? So, meaning that we are pushing it past what is normal. So in this case, I can click on it, go down to alpha gain, and you can see it already set it to something. It has a 2 and a -1. Which is by default, that's what an alpha gain is set to. And if you wanted to, you could set that to 1 and -0.5. So the calculations to that equation right there, that 2 -1, you know, that's how you learn to find those calculations. Is if you generate this stuff in Maya, you can figure out how it works, and that way when you're dragging abstract into the equation like this, how do I calculate for it? Well, very easy. You just find the gray point and then the 2 negatives, or the negative and the positive, and you get this displacement. And then after that, it's just gain. Alright, so now that we see the very basic calculation for the transferring of a displacement over to a lower piece of geometry, let's get into a little bit more complex situation in a perfect world where the industry is right now.